14th, Sunday after Pentecost. We'll be back here again in Denver. And if I can pray for my brother, Father Tim, he arrived today also. My brother arrived today visiting. He was in Kentucky last week. I left on Saturday morning, and he left this morning. And so won't see him today. I have to head down to Phoenix, but my brother, Father Tim, is visiting here today, and he'll be leaving back to the Philippines in a couple of days. And so he's pray for him to get the grace to join the resistance. He's still fighting it, and doesn't have any good answers, but still fighting it. And so in any case, just keep him in your prayers. He's actually busy. He might be here now. He's just arriving, I think, now. The epistle for this 14th Sunday after Pentecost is taken from St. Paul's letter to Galatians chapter 5. Brethren, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. For these are contrary one to another, so that you do not the things that you would. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Nor now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are fornication, uncleanness, immodesty, luxury, idolatry, witchcrafts, enmities, contentions, emulations, wraths, quarrels, dissensions, sects, and the murders, envies, murders, dissensions, revelings, and the such like, of the which I foretell you, and I have foretold to you, that they who do such things shall not attain the kingdom of heaven, kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is charity, joy, peace, patience, benignity, goodness, longanimity, mildness, faith, modesty, continency, chastity. Against such there is no law. And they that are Christ have crucified their flesh with the vices and concupiscences. And then the Gospel. They've taken that according to St. Matthew chapter 6. At that time Jesus said to his disciples, no man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will sustain the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Therefore I say unto you, be not solicitous for your life, what you shall eat, nor for your body, what you shall put on. But is not the life more than the meat, and the body more than the raiment? Behold the birds of the air, for they neither sow, nor do they reap, nor gather into barns, and your heavenly Father feedeth them. Are you not of much more value than they? And which of you, by taking thought, can add to his stature 1 cubit? And for raiment, why are you solicitous? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow, they labor not, neither do they spin. But I say to you, that not even Solomon in all of his glory was arrayed as one of these. Nay, if God so clothed the grass of the field, which is today and tomorrow is cast into the oven, how much more you, O ye of little faith? Be not solicitous, therefore, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or wherewith shall we be clothed? For after all these things do the heathen seek. For your Father knoweth that you have need of all these things. Seek ye therefore the kingdom of God and his justice, and all these things shall be added unto you besides. Thus are the words of today's Holy Gospel. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Now we find ourselves in the year 2017 in this battle of the faith that's been going on since the beginning of time. And we have an interesting point here made out in the Gospel. This is the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount, and taken from the Sermon on the Mount, our Lord, given his first public sermon, speaks about, he begins with the Beatitudes. And after this, a little bit later, he says, no man can serve two masters. And the difference between these two masters, it says no man can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will sustain the one and despise the other. In the Latin it says contemnet, he will condemn the other. He will hate the one and condemn the other. Either you will sustain the one and condemn the other. That's one way to have a master. To sustain a master, to bear him, and then to condemn the other one. And the other option is to love the one and hate the other. One involves love and hate, which is deep inside the soul. And the other, neither love nor hate. And why is it in the second one there's neither love nor hate? Because the love of the second one is the love of self. The second one belongs to the city that St. Augustine speaks about. He says, two loves built two cities. What is the city of the Satan? Satan's the head of the city. He has many, many hierarchy, members of the hierarchy. There are devils below him and devils below them. And there are evil men that rule in the earth in the name of Satan. And they have authority over the devils, over the wicked men that they teach. Do we love them? Do the Satanists love their satanic masters? Do the devils love the devil? No, they do not. They sustain him. They tolerate him. And do they really hate with the right kind of hatred? The enemy, who is our Lord Jesus Christ. The enemy, who is the follower of Christ, the apostle, the teacher of Christ. The one who goes into the world and says, you must follow the commandments, you must believe in the teachings of the gospel, you must reject all false religions, and you must not follow these 14 wicked things, which St. Paul speaks of in the epistle. And who does these things shall not attain the kingdom of heaven. What do they do about such a man? They don't say, I hate him, though they do. They rather condemn him. They rather despise him. And this is the way in which we can test. Because there are levels of love and levels of hate. And levels of sustaining and levels of condemning. We sustain and we condemn. We love and we hate. Now with the levels of love, the levels of hate, the minimum love of God is that I love him enough to save my soul. And I hate the devil enough to stay away from sin. And then there is the love of the saints, which is to love everything about God, love everything about his kingdom, love every atom and molecule in the beautiful universe that he made, and therefore to hate the enemy of those things, and to hate that which is against God in even the smallest way. The more we love God, the more the hatred of sin enters our hearts. Love and hate, in fact, are properly of the follower of Christ. Whereas the man who follows God, only follows the devil, loves only himself. And because he loves only himself, in order to get by, he sells his soul to the devil. Now there's those that sell their soul to the devil in the famous way. They actually say, Lord, devil, you give me 40 years of reign, like Elizabeth, who now burns in hell. Elizabeth the queen, you give me 40 years of reign. You make me the queen, and I will serve you faithfully. So she made a deal with the devil. And so many other souls made deals with the devil. The rock singers, the musicians, the movie stars. There are many, many souls that have made deals actually with the devil. This is the extreme case. But in fact, every single soul that goes to hell makes the same deal with the devil. And every soul that goes to hell makes it for the same reason. And that is why we have the remainder of this famous gospel, which we quote so often. That, why do you worry about what you shall eat, what you shall drink, and what you shall put on? Who worries about that? The one that loves himself. Now, supposing that we love the Master, supposing that we love God, then if we eat, it doesn't matter. When a mother loves her children, in fact, even amongst the Indian tribes in Canada, they noticed the missionaries came, and they noticed that the squaws, during the wintertime, they would starve and die. The old men would have a piece of meat, and they would not eat it. The squaws would have a piece of meat, and they would not eat it. They would starve rather than eat the meat. And they would wait for a young brave who was very weak, and they would feed the brave the meat, because the brave could hunt. And unless the brave could hunt, the whole tribe dies. They weren't vegetarians. They didn't know about fish. And so the brave had to hunt, and so they would look at meat. They were not Catholics. They knew that the tribe was more important than them. That the future was more important to them. And they would not touch it. They would die of starvation. They said 1/3 of the tribe died of starvation every year. And now the miracle is, how does the tribe still exist when every single winter in Canada they die and they die and they die, and yet they're still alive. The tribe still exists. They would hold the meat and not touch it and give it to the brave who could hunt. And they would not eat it themselves. Why? Because they loved something other than themselves. Many of these would have saved their souls. They loved something other than themselves. But the kingdom of Satan, love of self. Therefore, there's no loving of the master, who is called the devil. They don't love him. They only sustain him. Now, as we make the transition between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of Satan, what happens is we begin to sustain our masters. We begin to tolerate them. And we no longer love them. And we no longer hate the enemy of God, the enemy of truth. We rather condemn. We switch from hatred of the error, hatred of the sin, to condemning persons. And why do we make this transition? As Father Leviatius used to say, remember, we human beings, we're not angels. Angels aim straight forward, and then in an instant they turn and they face back. Human beings can't do that. If we want to face back, even if we're very fast, we have to turn and turn and turn all 180 degrees. We have to physically turn. The same is true inside of our hearts. We have to turn, away from God and to the devil. And we will notice that something happens to where we sustain, no longer love. Where we condemn and no longer hate. And this is what's happened in the Society of St. Pius X in the last years. Read here again. I had an argument with my brother just a few days ago. Usual response. But nonetheless, they are concerning the situation in our society. That it's changed. He said, well, no, it's just a change of style. I don't like it either. It's a change of approach. It's an accidental change. It's not an essential change. So therefore we can sustain it. And you have to be condemned because you jumped too soon. You have to be condemned because you're judging too much. Visiting the Philippines only a few weeks ago in August, got my brother again there in August, and he was just before he left to go to Fatima, just before he came to America, where he is now for his last few days, and met with Father Larocque, one of the priests, one of the 7 priests that signed the letter of the French deans against the the marriages, the statement of Pope Benedict on April the 4th, Pope Francis on April the 4th, saying that bishops can allow the society priests to witness marriages. And then our Bishop Flay wrote a letter of great gratitude. This scandalized the priests and the faithful in France and throughout the world, many places. And the 7 deans, the superiors of the priests in France, wrote a letter that they read on the same Sunday. I think it was May the 6th or May the 7th, the first Sunday in May. And that same day they were all fired. That same day they were all punished. And one of them was a French priest who was about 55 years old, doesn't speak a word of English. He was transferred as his punishment to the Philippines, and as a serious punishment because he was stationed with my brother. So he was sent to the Philippines to be stationed with my brother. So when I went there, I met him. Asked him why he signed the declaration. After a long conversation, he couldn't figure out why. But he did write a letter But he said there was no problem of faith, and there's no serious practical problem. So then why did you write a letter that there's a problem if you don't believe there's a problem? But nonetheless, he couldn't really answer. But he insisted that there wasn't a problem. So then why did you write the letter that there is a problem? But nonetheless, he said not a problem of faith. No problem of faith. He is against a personal prelature, thought that it would be a compromise of faith if we have a personal prelature. Well, then that means it's something serious then. If it's a compromise of faith, and you need to say something about it. He says, well, maybe it is compromise of faith, but I don't really believe it's compromise of faith. And then at the end of our conversation, he said, remember those 6 conditions? The 6 conditions are against the faith back in 2012. The 6 conditions that the society bound itself to. At the end of our conversation, my brother, he was speaking some words of English he could understand, and my brother was mainly translating. And he said, well, if we could only go back to the 6 conditions, everything would be fine. I want to go back to the 6 conditions. So let's revisit those 6 conditions of 2012, which the Society of St. Pius X said in its public statement of July the 14th, the society binds itself to the conditions which it will accept in order to make a deal with Rome. Binds itself to these 6 conditions. And the general chapter decided on those 6 conditions. The 6 conditions, when they first came out, they were a scandal. Now, the priest that's against the deal with Rome says the conditions are better than what's now, so they are good. See, it was a scandal when they turned the altar around. And they were no longer facing God. But then they introduced men giving out Holy Communion in the hands. And that became a scandal, and it was acceptable to turn the altar towards men, but don't have communion in the hand. And then they had girls hand out Holy Communion. And it was a scandal to have girls hand out Holy Communion, but only men hand out Holy Communion in my parish. So as the world gets more and more liberal, the previous liberalism becomes conservative, and the previous liberalism becomes good. And this is how the devil brings us away from God. So let's go to these 6 conditions. And so there are 6 conditions. Here are the final declarations with the general chapter adopted before its conclusion and the visit to the grave of our beloved founder. This declaration will also be published in Dici, the declaration that is of July 14, 2012, the official communication organ of the General House. Also, the initial conditions were better defined for a possible normalization for our relations with the official church. The first 3 conditions are sine qua non conditions. Sine qua non conditions, that is, without which not. So if these conditions are not fulfilled, no deal. 2 years ago, a big argument with my brother, discussing with my brother, with about 7 of us priests talking to him, and he admitted that the first condition was a compromise of faith. We talked about it again the other day. He said, yeah, I used to think that the first condition might be a compromise of faith, but now I don't think that might be really truly the case. So no longer think that it's a compromise of faith. So the first condition, the sine qua non condition. Number 1, the society, in order to make a deal with Rome, first condition, number 1, the freedom to preserve, share, and teach the sound doctrine of the constant magisterium of the church and the unchanging truths of divine tradition. And, secondly, the freedom to accuse and even to correct the promoters of the errors or the innovations of modernism, liberalism, and Vatican II and its aftermath. So this is the first condition. We want the freedom to teach sound doctrine, and we want the freedom to accuse and to correct, even correct, those people who are promoting the errors, and notice how carefully it's said, the errors or the innovations of modernism, liberalism, and Vatican II and its aftermath. So a lot of modernism and liberalism are errors, Vatican II innovations, aftermath both. Very carefully said so that a conservative can easily agree with a statement, which is that there are innovations in Vatican II, but not necessarily errors. A liberal, a Catholic can come in and say, well, maybe there are errors in the council, but it doesn't say that there are. Carefully avoiding that. But there is the 2 problems. The Catholic asking for the freedom to teach sound doctrine. This is in itself a sin against the faith. If I ask for the right to teach the truth, this means that I admit that there is a right to teach something else. You have a right to drive a car. If you're a good citizen and you haven't broken any laws and you're 16 years old and you pass the driver's test, you have the right to drive a car. But you don't have an obligation to drive a car everywhere you go. Like, for instance, upstairs. You don't have an obligation to drive a car, but you have the right to drive a car. If you want, you can take a bus. If you want, you can walk. There are other rights that are assumed in that right. So if you have the right to drive a car, there is a right to also take a bus. There is a right to walk. There is a right to take a bicycle. There are other rights included in that. There's another way of saying it. As an American citizen, you are obliged to drive a car. Now, if you're obliged to drive a car, that means you can't take a bike, you can't walk, you can't take a bus. So if your car is broken, you're stuck. You can't go to McDonald's. So the fact is that there's obligation and then there's right. Here we're asking for the freedom, that is the right. The right to profess sound doctrine. This is the true and implicit acceptance of the right to teach error, and is thereby a compromise of faith. We have an obligation to teach the sound doctrine. We cannot ask the right to teach sound doctrine. If someone tells us to not teach sound doctrine, we have to tell them, go to hell. That's what we have to tell them. And we have to tell them that the sound doctrine. Now, this is so important that we have more than 20 million Catholics who, rather than accept it only as a right to teach sound doctrine, but considered it an obligation to teach sound doctrine, became martyrs in the last 2,000 years. Millions and millions of Catholics were told, you cannot teach sound doctrine. And they chose to teach it anyway and be martyred. The second goes along with it. The freedom to accuse and even correct the promoters of the errors or the innovations of modernism, liberalism, and Vatican II and its aftermath. We will not make a deal with Rome. And that's number one, we are allowed to continue to teach sound doctrine along with those who are going to teach false doctrine. Secondly, we won't make a deal with Rome unless we can correct and criticize the promoters. This is very carefully written. Not criticize the errors, but criticize the promoters, the persons responsible for the errors and innovations of modernism, liberalism, and Vatican II and its aftermath. This second, same as the first, is a compromise of faith. Number one, you don't always have to criticize the promoters of error. But you always have to criticize the error. And many times you must also criticize the promoters. Now let's consider, it's now 2017. And in 2017, the society has said in 2012, we will not make a deal with Rome unless we can continue to criticize the promoters. Who are the promoters of modernism? The promoters of liberalism? The promoters of communion to the divorced and remarried? Promoters of not believing in the Catholic God, the promoters of shutting down Catholic tradition by telling sisters they can no longer wear their habits, the promoters who say that to live in the old-fashioned religion is backwards and you need to see a counselor and you need to be shut down. One promoter is called Pope Francis. Now let's consider this promoter. The society said in 2012, we demand the freedom to criticize the promoters, all right? Get out DT.org. Get out SSPX.org. Go to the sermons of the priests and the bishops, particularly those in authority, such as Bishop Boulay and Father Wegner and the various authorities, Father Pfluger, Father Nelly of the society. Are they criticizing the promoters? Are they saying, Pope Francis, you are bad. Pope Francis, you need to be corrected. Pope Francis, you are wrong. Absolutely not. The closest you get is Father Glaz's pathetic criticism of Amoris Laetitia, in which he simply says, many people say that Amoris Laetitia is heretical, but in fact it's not really heretical. And some people say that Amoris Laetitia obliges priests to give Holy Communion to divorce and remarriage, but this is a misunderstanding. And of course, it isn't good to give divorced, remarried communion, but it's a misunderstanding. In 2012 itself, when Pope Benedict wrote his famous statement, which New York Times figured out. New York Times figured out there was something wrong with his statement, but they're staunch Catholics, they're very doctrinal people, but they could figure it out. New York Times and BBC and CNN figured it out. They said, wait a minute, the Pope said in his new book, that's the Holy Pope, Benedict, the light of the world, he said that a homosexual prostitute begins to be moral when he uses a condom. He begins his path to morality. Now that's worse than anything Pope Francis has said. That's what he said. New York Times, scandalized. BBC, scandalized. SSPX, not scandalized. Bishop Villay wrote, we asked for the Pope to have a clarification. And we asked the Pope to clarify. What did you mean by that and here's the clarification. The Pope said that if a homosexual prostitute uses a condom, it's the beginning of the path of morality. And we clarified that by saying he didn't really mean to say that. What he meant to say was that a homosexual prostitute who uses a condom begins the path of morality. So you got the clarification. Now, and so we shouldn't understand it in the first sentence, which is the same as the second sentence, but rather in the second sentence, to take it in a different light from the first sentence, and so we can have a clarification that in fact it doesn't mean what it means what it means, but not in the way that it means it. And so, therefore, you can misunderstand the Pope as if he's promoting something which maybe he's not promoting. Is that condemning the promoters? Absolutely not. What about the statements about the promoters? The promoters, we have Cardinal Burke. What does he say? We should not follow Amoris Laetitia. Well, that's good. Why? Because it's against Vatican II. That's bad. We should not follow Amoris Laetitia. Why? Because that's against St. John Paul II. Now, why is it that we should not follow Amoris Laetitia? Because it's against our Lord Jesus Christ and the Catholic Church. Is it against John Paul II? Absolutely not. Is it against Vatican II? Absolutely not. Amoris Laetitia is simply putting the council into practice. That's all it is. And now we're finding society priests saying, no, Amoris Laetitia goes further than the council. We're now beyond the council. So we got to get people back to the council because it's better than beyond the council. No, absolutely not. So the first condition, does it exist? No, it does not. First of all, the condition is a compromise of faith. And the answer of my brother the other day, I used to think it was compromise of faith, now I don't really think it is. Why not? Well, I mean. So, no explanation. Second condition, sine qua non condition. We want the exclusive use, it's the same compromise of faith condition. We want the exclusive use of the liturgy of 1962, the retention of the sacramental practice that we currently maintain, including holy orders, confirmation, and marriage. Now remember, we're supposed to be preparing, we'll talk about marriage right now, we're supposed to be preparing for a personal prelature. You know, one personal prelature in this diocese is the personal prelature of all Eastern Rite Catholics. I think the Ukrainian bishop, is he in Denver? I think he's in Denver, right? Is the Ukrainian bishop in Denver? Or is it Chicago? It might be Chicago. But anyway, still Ukrainian Rite. Ukrainian Rite bishop is either here in Denver or he's in Chicago. All Ukrainians, if a Ukrainian wants to get married, he does not go and talk to the local bishop. He doesn't know what his name is, he doesn't care who he is, and he doesn't like him. What does he do? He has to get approval from his local Ukrainian priest, who gets approval from the Ukrainian bishop who's in Chicago. I think there's only about 4 eparchies in the United States. So there's Connecticut, and then there's Chicago, and then there's somewhere in California. And so, but this might be Chicago. So he has to find out from Chicago. It's a personal prelature. It's a personal diocese. All Ukrainians who live anywhere between the Gulf of Mexico and Chicago, between the Appalachian Mountains and the Rocky Mountains, they are under the Bishop of Chicago. That bishop is the one who determines their marriages. not the local bishop. When they write their marriages, it is not written in any register in the Denver diocese. So if you look at the Denver diocese, the Ukrainian couple got married. Are they in the diocese papers? No, not. They're not in the diocese papers. They're in the diocese. You want to see their diocese papers? Go to Chicago. That's where they are. So they're wherever the eparchy is, which are these dioceses. The Eastern way of saying diocese. That's all it is. Wherever the eparchy is, that's where the paperwork is written. Now, if we're really going to be a personal prelature, which is what we're supposed to receive, then our marriages should be written in our books, and they should be recorded in our headquarters, which are in Menzingen, Switzerland, and there's where it should be found, and not in the diocesan books. We are not under the diocese. So says Rome in its promise. So now what are we doing? We're accepting that our marriages will be recorded in the local diocese of Denver. Remember, just about a month and a half, 2 months ago, Father Hugo was flying to the Kansas City airport. You know, it's a small airport. And they have little gates where you're locked in the gate together with your closest friends. One of them was the Bishop of Kansas City. They were on the same flight. So he met the Bishop of Kansas City. The Bishop of Kansas City said, well, I'm meeting next week, or within the next 2 weeks, with the Society of St. Pius X Superiors here in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm meeting with them to talk about how we're going to implement this diocesan rule, the Pope's new request, that we approve that our priest does the marriage and that we work with the local society priest to do the marriages. Does that fit the second condition? Is anyone complaining about it? You know, in 1988, the Society of St. Peter said the third condition, we'll go straight to it, the guarantee of at least one bishop. That's a third sine qua non condition. You know when the Society of St. Peter was founded in 1988? They said, we're going to get a bishop. We are going to get our own bishop of the Fraternity of St. Peter. And we are going to get the same deal that Archbishop Lefebvre was promised in May of 88. He didn't accept it, but we are accepting it. Now do the math. 88, followed by 98, followed by 08, followed by 18. 29 years have passed. How many bishops does the Fraternity of St. Peter have? The total number is 0. Are they even requesting a bishop? No, they are not. They were supposed to get a bishop. That was one of the Fraternity of St. Peter's sine qua non conditions. They forgot about it. Is Bishop Fillet asking for a bishop from Rome? And notice also the vague way of saying it. We want at least one bishop. We think that means consecrate one of our guys a bishop. But that isn't necessarily what it means. It means it's the bishop. So maybe they'll give us, Cardinal Mueller as our bishop. Maybe they'll, give us the retired Cardinal Ratzinger as our bishop. Maybe they'll give us some other modernist bishop. Maybe Mahoney can be our bishop. So the fact is, what does it mean, at least one bishop? We think it means that we're going to have a bishop consecrated to take the place of our 4 bishops. That's not what it says. Are the 3 conditions still really there? Does anyone still remember them? They were compromises of faith back then. They're still compromises now. They were a stepping stone to the destruction of the faith of our souls. And once we accepted this, we accepted that we have a right to have a different opinion. Notice the language of the last 5 years. Bishop Fillet says every time that there's something wrong with the council, he says, we still have a problem with the council. As I mentioned in a sermon a few weeks ago, or a month ago, whenever it was, this is exactly the same as Caiaphas. Remember on Good Friday morning, Caiaphas said, why did you write INRI on the cross, Pilate? Why did you write Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews? Do not write that he is the King of the Jews, but write rather, he called himself the King of the Jews. And Caiaphas and Pilate said, quote, Scripsi, Scripsi, what I have written, I have written. I'm not changing it. He is the King of the Jews. Is there a difference between King of the Jews? He called himself the King of the Jews. You can check that out. There's the Pope. That's Francis in Rome. And then there's Pope Michael in Kansas. And there's one of my classmates is Pope Vincent. What's his name? I've just seen his face. Pope Victor. Sorry, Pope Victor. So I have in my class in the seminary, he never got ordained a priest, but he did become Pope. That was the important thing. So Pope Victor. So Pope Victor calls himself Pope. Pope Popelmacher, the brother of Father Pope, one of the 4 Popelmacher brothers, so I don't want to say the wrong name, but Pope Popelmacher, one of the 4 brothers, he calls himself Pope. And Pope Michael calls himself Pope. Then there's the Pope of Greenwich Village. And there's all kinds of popes. You call yourself a pope. Now, if the statement says he is the Pope, that's speaking of truth. If the statement says he calls himself Pope, that's just his opinion. His opinion might be right. If Pope Francis says, I think I'm the Pope, he's pretty smart today. I'm doing the right thing he would ever say. So the fact is that he actually is the Pope. He's the Bishop of Rome. Pope is just Bishop of Rome. We call Pope simply means father, papa. Pope only means father. That's all the word means, father. But he's the father of all of us. The Bishop of Rome, he's the Pope. And he knows he's the Bishop of Rome, therefore he's the Pope. So the fact is, does he know he's the Bishop of Rome? Okay, he's a pretty smart guy. Now, the fact is that is it a statement of fact or is it a statement of opinion? When the truth becomes a statement of opinion, it is denied. And it's a sin against the faith. It is my opinion that Jesus is God. That's a sinful statement. It is not my opinion that Jesus is God. It is true that Jesus is God. He is God. And if you don't like it, that's too bad, but He's God. So this statement that we want to believe, we want to use the liturgy of 62, means we accept the false liturgy, compromise of faith. The three sine qua non conditions are bad. Also, the third condition is not a legitimate condition. To demand a bishop. That's not a legitimate condition. We don't have no right to demand a bishop of Rome. We have a right to demand faith? Yes. We have a right to demand the teaching of the truth? Yes. We have a right to resist Rome to the face? Absolutely yes. We have a right to say, you must give me a bishop in order that I can go on my own little personal life. What's the problem of this? It's in the gospel. What are our new leaders? Do we love them? Do we hate them? No. The priests of society simply sustain them. Either I will love the one and hate the other, or I will sustain the one and condemn the other. Sustain the one and despise the other. So we find in the Society of St. Pius X a new change, a true paradigm shift, in which the truth becomes our opinion rather than objective truth. Then, that we no longer love our masters, we no longer love them as representatives of God, we rather sustain and tolerate them until we get a new election and throw them out. Bishop Blaise can be thrown out next year. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But that's not the right attitude. We don't sustain. And we're going to get a new guy who's going to make life better for us. And then we condemn the others. You're judgmental. You're wicked. You're bad. You're a bad person. You were always bad before. So they condemn Father Pfeiffer, condemn Father Hugo, condemn all the others. They condemn all of us. We're condemned. But what is it that should be condemned? If we have false doctrine, let that false doctrine be condemned. We have a false teaching, let that false teaching be condemned. Let the teaching be condemned. Not worry so much about the persons, but rather the condemnation of persons. This is how the shift happens. Then we have the final three wicked conditions, which are called desirable conditions, wishable conditions. In other words, this is a foolish thing to do. Whoever was their counselor, normal SSPX counselor, because we do everything wrong. We do a potluck wrong. But the fact that's where the SSPX spirit still comes through. These are conditions that you're going to accept. Don't talk about it. Let everybody guess. Don't write down we're willing to accept these three bad things. Don't do that. But they did anyway. So there's three wishable conditions. Which means if we don't get them, that's fine. Don't do that when you're in negotiations. Somebody needs to give these guys some counseling. So, number one wishable condition. A separate ecclesiastical court of the first instance. What does that mean? We accept all novusordal annulments. We know there are many valid annulments because there are many people invalidly married. But we do not accept novusordal annulments per se. We don't accept all novusordal annulments because we know that's basically Catholic divorce. And that's therefore forbidden. But what does this say? We want a court of first instance. Now, if you know canon law, there are a court of first instance and there's a court of second instance. The second instance always can overrule the first instance. So what's the point? Why should we have a court of first instance and say there's no grounds of annulment? So the second court can say, forget it, they're annulled anyway. Why waste your time? This is not only a bad condition, it's stupid. And it's an admission that we accept the annulments. Absolutely. Second, exemption of the houses of the SSPX from the diocesan bishops. That's the most wicked of them all. We accept, this means we don't have to be exempt from the bishops. It means we don't have to be a personal prelature. It means we don't have to be exempt. We accept the local authority of the Bishop of Denver to tell us to shut down our parishes, to tell us we can't say Mass here, say Mass there, to tell us we can't do this marriage, can't do that marriage, to tell us whatever commands he wishes to make. We accept the authority of the local bishops in their practical exercise of shutting down the apostolate, of working with the salvation of souls. And as it was said also at the same time, we will not open any new priories, not open any new chapels without the approval of the bishop. This is an wishable condition, which is a compromise of faith. And the third, a pontifical commission for tradition in Rome. We get to get our voice. There's the homosexual group, and then there's the pro-Muslim group, and there's the pro-Hindu group, and then there's the pro-Protestant group, and then there's the pro-SSPX group. We get the apartment number 417, and they get all the other apartments, and we get our word at 9:32 on the second Wednesday of every third month. We get to say our speech, and so we're just one of many amongst the truth. And this is sinning as a faith, because we are not just the SSPX. SSPX is unimportant. What is important is the faith that we represent. And we don't say there should be a pontifical commission for tradition in Rome. The pontifical commission must be traditional. And if it's not, it has to be chastised, it has to be criticized, it has to be condemned. The pontifical commission for tradition in Rome, which depends directly on the Pope. Isn't that comforting? We're going to have the protection of Pope Francis. So they're directly on the Pope, with the majority of the members and president in favor of tradition. The lawyer looked at that and tell you you're an idiot. Everybody's in favor of tradition. He doesn't say the majority should be SSPX priests. Doesn't say the majority should be truly traditional. The majority are in favor of tradition. That is, novus ordo people who say they like tradition. These conditions, which the society binds itself to, equal a compromise of faith. Now, 5 years later, what do we see? The first condition is the one that's not being fulfilled. The first condition is that the promoters, criticize the promoters. We've stopped doing that. The other conditions we have accepted and we continue to move forward with. We're working with the local bishops. We have no problem working with them. We're going to meeting with the local bishops, meeting with the local priests. And what's happening is the prophecy of Father Chazelle is being fulfilled that he made back in 2012, that there will not be a signing of a deal with Rome on a specific day that the SSPX handed itself over to the modernists. Rather, it will be a step-by-step, incremental losing of its control and being accepted in this diocese. For instance, the SSPX is now fully accepted all over Argentina. Another indult community. But it's not fully accepted here yet. Some bishops are in favor of us. Some bishops are condemning us. We have the official proclamations of Rome accepting that our marriages, our confessions are all valid, and that this confessions became valid. And there's another where the lie is told to the people. You are told that Rome accepts the validity of our confessions. No, Rome still teaches, modernist Rome, that all the confessions of the society, previous to Pope Francis's indult of allowing our confessions to be valid, all of them were invalid. It doesn't say they were valid. Same thing about the marriages. The Pope says, bishops can give the approval of a priest to approve of our marriages, which they have anyway. It does not say that our marriages are valid. They are all still considered to be invalid. So if any of you, after the approval fully comes through, want to get an annulment, it'll take 2.5 seconds. Possibly 3 if you have some kind of a delay. You go in and they're going to tell you you've got a lack of canonical form. Now, if you get married in 2018, when everything's okay, your marriage is valid. But if you got married in 2015, 2016, or 1990s, all your marriages are invalid because they were not approved by Rome. Such is the teaching of the modernist Rome. This statement of Rome, Bishop Villay gives gratitude to. And our conservative priests say they're concerned. They're concerned. What happened to, that's a bunch of demonic crap? What happened to, that's a lie. What happened to, we're not tolerating that. What happened to the old days when our priests used to say, you do not go to Father Skippy to get married because it's a danger to your faith. If you go to Father Skippy, you're going to find that he's a nice guy. You're going to meet with Father Skippy. He's going to tell you stop going to the Latin Mass. He's going to tell you stay away from Catholic tradition. He's going to tell you come back to the Novus Ordo. And guess what? They're going to do it. Some of them. Don't send your sheep into the mouths of the lions. Therefore, we would tell the faithful, do not go to the Novus Ordo priest to ask permission to get married, because he's a Novus Ordo priest. Don't go to the Novus Ordo priest to get permission from the local bishop, because this equals a danger to your faith. And then we have our famous M2 forms. We go all the way up to M16. That's the one that goes like this. So we have the M2 form is the one that says, I know that I'm supposed to be married by my local priest, the pastor of the bride. Not the husband. Nobody cares about him. The pastor of the bride. So I'm supposed to be married in the church of the bride by the pastor of the bride. I'm aware of that. However, the priest in that church is a stinking modernist. The priest in that church accepts Vatican II and the new teachings on marriage. Therefore, in order to preserve my faith, I don't want to get that new education class on NFP. I don't want to get that new education class on what modern marriage is. And I don't want to be married by a modernist priest. I don't foresee this situation changing in the next 30 days. According to the law of the church, if the situation is not going to change in 30 days, the couple can marry themselves. And if there's a priest available, they must find the priest. And the marriage is valid. Even the case of canon law before, which they don't bring out anymore. In the old days, a young boy and girl wanted to get married. The priest won't marry him. He refuses. So they go into the Wild West, because they're in the Diocese of Baltimore, Maryland. They get on a train, or they get on a wagon, and they go to the Wild West, where there's no priest and no bishop. They get married. They come back, and they live in Maryland. So there were a lot of complaints. They went, and they got married. They went and stayed for 2 months out in the Wild West, where there was no priest. They then got themselves married by some priest out there, didn't know what he was doing. They then came back, I want to declare that marriage invalid. Rome said no, marriage is valid. Even though they were doing it by deception. Rome said no, marriage is valid. That's the old law of the church. Now we say, now that the marriages are all invalid because the state of necessity is going away. And our priests say, no, we can still claim state of necessity. Not the necessity it used to be, but we can still claim state of necessity. So this is a grave problem of faith. It continues, it's worse. And now the conservative priests accept, like a priest tells me a couple weeks ago, the conservative priest society, I want to stick with the 6 conditions. My brother tells me a couple days ago, I used to think they were a compromise, but maybe they're not a compromise. You stay in the water, it gets warmer, and you get boiled. There's no other way. The truth didn't change, but their opinions change, their situation changes, their teaching changes, the truth doesn't change. And how do they stand themselves? They don't say, I love the truth and I hate the sin, love the one, hate the other, but they rather say, I sustain him, because he's not that bad yet. It's not that horrible yet. So I sustain Bishop Fillet's false teaching. I sustain Bishop Fillet's false punishments. I sustain them, and I condemn anyone who doesn't sustain them. They are following the false master. So in any case, we'll close it at that. And we cannot follow the false master. We can't do that. In any case, we'll close it at that. God bless you all. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.